Okay, this is Block 8, Pax Americana, Section 1, Post-War America, with the section beginning the economic boom. After the recession of 1946-1947 and 1948, the American economy, for the first time since the mid-20s, took off. And it took off in a way that it had not taken off since industrialization in the 1870s and 1880s. Gross domestic product doubled in the 1950s and nearly doubled again in the 1960s before slowing down in the 1970s. Millions upon millions of Americans joined the middle class. Standards of living, standards of education, wealth, health, social mobility all rose across all income groups, across all races in the United States of America. That the post-war boom, the post-war economic boom, was one of the most important economic facts of modern America. There's lots of reasons for this boom. Some of them are luck, some of them are inherent in the United States. Well, first of all, one of the reasons for the boom is the rest of the industrial world is destroyed. There are really very few working factories in Europe. The factories in England are tired and broken down and have not been, maintained and updated in a generation. As we said at the end of Block 7, American factories were producing 50% of the entire world's output of goods. And once these factories got converted to civilian goods, with 50% of the world's industrial plant in the United States, it's almost impossible not to make money. Secondly, throughout the war, people got paid, of course, but they couldn't spend any money because there was nothing, there was no consumer goods. People would make $100 a week, and after you paid for your food and your rent, you had money left over, but you couldn't buy a new car, you couldn't buy a new house, you couldn't go on vacation, so people just were saving and saving and saving money. Well, once the factories are now producing consumer goods, people have tons of savings and they go out and they spend, spend, spend. Consumer spending soared. A consequence of this 25-year boom were varied. Like we said, it created unprecedented social mobility. It underwrote the civil rights movement. It funded vast new social welfare programs. It funded the Cold War. And it provided a middle class, or better than middle class, standard of living for a vast majority of Americans. What were some of the other reasons that we could go into? First of all, by the early 1950s, the Cold War, which we're going to be talking about in this block, the Cold War is in full swing. Military spending plays a key role in this boom. We needed more planes, more tanks, more guns, more bullets, again, to fight the Cold War and especially the war in Korea. The United States constantly had to be on guard for Soviet attack, so you needed a constantly on guard military. Industries grew up that were related to defense spending. Industries like aeronautics, electronics, plastics, fuel, all saw vast increases in the 1950s. Throughout the 1950s, military spending averaged around 10% of GDP. So for every $10 that the United States created in the 1950s, one of those dollars went to military spending. In comparison, the number today is around 2%. Another reason for this economic boom was worker productivity. As we saw with the GI Bill, workers are more educated. They gained skills fighting in the Army and the Navy and the Army Air Corps and the Marines during the war. From farmers to high-tech workers, workers are getting more done in less time due to technology and due to their own educational achievements. What all worker productivity is how much work does one person get done in 1 hour. And with a higher education level and better technology, one person can do more work. And that creates more wealth, and more wealth creates this economic boom. The United States was also the world's largest supply of cheap energy. Still in the 1950s, the United States is the world's largest producer of energy, coal, gas, and oil. Even the oil in the Middle East, which is just starting to come online in the 1950s, was owned and controlled by American and European companies. which pumped it out nice and cheap and shipped it across the ocean, protected by the United States Navy, nice and cheap. In the 1950s, gas could usually be had for about 10 cents a gallon. And when gas is 10 cents a gallon, your cars get bigger, they get more powerful, they get faster because gasoline is so cheap. People drove more because energy is so cheap. People move to the suburbs. They have bigger houses, which need more heating. The invention or the popularization of air conditioning, which is energy intensive, give people more comfort to their lives. People begin traveling long distances by car, and for the first time, people begin traveling long distances by airplane. The civilian flight industry, really jumps into high gear during the 1950s. Tens of thousands of miles of highways are built. All of the farms that had not been electrified during the New Deal were electrified in the 1950s. People were buying refrigerators, freezers, televisions, vacuum cleaners, second cars. All of this runs on energy. And in the 1950s, energy, and through the 1960s, energy for an American consumer is cheap, cheap, cheap. And cheap energy allows further investment into stuff that uses energy. Another thing adding to worker productivity and wealth was the creation of what's known as agribusiness. The 1950s sees the end, really, of that bedrock institution of Jefferson's America, the small yeoman farmer. He has been disappearing for a long time in American history, but by the end of the 1950s, that Jeffersonian ideal of the yeoman farmer working his free land is largely gone. Increases in productivity means that fewer people are needed to grow ever-increasing amounts of food. There are great opportunities to work in American cities. So there's push and there's pull factors. You don't need as many people working on the farm. That pushes people out. The cities are drawing people in with their promises of new jobs in factories and in service-related industries. So people were selling their farms, and they were bought up by what became known as agribusiness. Huge businesses, and their business was farming. They introduced economies of scale. It's a lot more efficient to plant 10,000 acres of corn than it is to plant 10 acres of corn. That's an economy of scale. A large farm can buy and maintain very, very costly equipment. Mechanization, which allows the tapping of rich new soil, plus government support, allows farmers to make more money than they had ever had before. In 2 small generations, farmers went from scratching out a living, walking behind 2 mules, to air-conditioned tractors, combines, automatic pickers, automatic reapers, listening to the radio about farms, commodity prices out of Chicago. Did we lose a romantic institution of Jeffersonian America? Yes, we did. And the small family farm remains. There are small family farms still in America, but for the most part, most of American food is produced by what's known as agribusiness. Economies of scale, efficiency, modern technology to produce the food that feeds the world. All of this stuff led and helped lead and helped contribute to the massive economic boom of the 1950s and 1960s.